Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello, so I am Dr. Pushpalata K, Professor and HOD of Anatomy, JSS Medical College, JSS Academy of Higher Education and Research, Mysore. So today's session we will discuss about what are the functional columns and the cranial nerve nuclei associated with the functional columns. So the learning objective for this session is enumerate the functional columns of cranial nerve nuclei, describe the afferent and efferent components of the cranial nerves, describe the association of functional columns with the cranial nerve nuclear groups with which they are related. So, before going to the functional columns, let us see what are these functional components. Okay. So, whether the sensation is from the CNS, then we call it as a efferent, or from the organ to CNS, we call it as afferent. If the sensation is from the viscera, we call it visceral. If it is from the body wall, we call it as a somatic. Sensation is from the structure derived from the pharyngeal arches, then we call it as a special component. If it is not from the others, we call it as a somatic. And also when we say the functional components, if the sensation are received from the special senses, that is the vision or auditory. So, keeping these components, the special functional components are divided into 7. Okay. So, one is the somatic efferent. Okay. So, this somatic efferent is the one which supplies the striated muscles of the body. Okay. So, all the striated muscles of the body is supplied, then we call it as a somatic efferent column. Then the next is the general visceral efferent. Okay. So, that is, as we know, the general, it is from the body wall. So, this supplies the viscera, that the name itself says the viscera, and it is an efferent. So, it supplies the smooth muscles and the glands, that is the general visceral efferent column. Okay. And the third component is the special visceral efferent. So, we know special means it is the muscles derived from the branchial apparatus. Okay, that is the branchial or pharyngeal arches. Then we call it as a special visceral efferent. So, the muscles which are supplied by this, we call it as a special visceral efferent column. Then the next is the coming to the afferent columns. Okay, then the general somatic afferent. Okay, so the general somatic, because somatic means it is a body wall, afferent means it is the sensation from the skin. Okay, so that we call it as a general somatic afferent. And what is the special somatic afferent? It is the as from the auditory and the cochlear nucleus, that is the structure derived in the otocyst, or the we call it as special somatic afferent column, that is auditory as well as the vestibular component. Next is the general visceral afferent. Okay, you know that it is a general and it is a viscera. Okay, so it is from the visceral epithelium, that is the viscera. The sensation is from the viscera. So, that is the general visceral afferent. Okay, and the next column is the special visceral afferent. Okay, so that the special visceral afferent, it is the which supplies, that is the special sensation, that is the taste. Okay, so that we call it as a special visceral afferent. Okay, so now finally these 7 functional components, that is the somatic efferent, then general visceral efferent, then special visceral efferent, general somatic afferent, special somatic afferent, general visceral afferent, and special visceral afferent. Okay. So, these are the 7 functional components. Okay. So, now let us see the cranial nerves. We have the 12 pair of cranial nerves. Okay. So, the first is an olfactory, it is a smell. Second is the optic, we know. And the third cranial nerve, that is the oculomotor. So, this is from the medial aspect of the crus cerebri, and from the lateral aspect we have the trochlear nerve. Okay. Then in the pons we have the junction between the middle cerebellar peduncle and the pons, we see the trigeminal nerve, and in the junction between the pons and medulla we see the abducent, facial and vestibulocochlear. Okay, and between the pyramid and the olive, what we see here, that is the hypoglossal nerve, and in the lateral sulcus, okay, lateral to the olive, what we see is the vagus and accessory nerves and the glossopharyngeal nerve. Okay, so this arrangement of the cranial nerve, it is the nuclei, the functional columns, always it is correlated with the development aspect of the brain. So, how this arrangement of these functional columns takes place is depending on the development. So, let us see how the structures develop. Okay. Now, first coming to the histogenesis of neural tube. You can see this neuroepithelial cells, it is a thick stratified epithelium. You can see here the neuroepithelium, the lot of cells, the many layer of cells are there. You can see there is a neuroblast, okay, the intermeiotic neuroepithelial cells, and you can see here the dividing neuroepithelial cells. Okay. So, here in the neural tube, we can see there is a central canal. Okay, next to that, the innermost layer is the ependymal layer. It is the neuroepithelial layer. It is a germinative layer. So, cells in this layer, they divide rapidly and forms the cells of the mantle layer. Next layer is the middle layer or the mantle layer. Okay, so this forms the grey matter and it consists of a neuroblasts. Okay, so that is the middle mantle layer. Then the outer, the marginal layer. Okay, so this forms the white matter and this has the process of this neuroblasts. Okay, so from inner to out we have ependymal layer, mantle layer and marginal layer. So, this is the basic structure of a neural tube when it is developing. Now, let us see in each region what happens. Okay. So, how these functional components are formed. Okay. So, as the neural tube is dividing, the developing, there is a sulcus limitans. Okay. So, this divides this into the ventral part is called as the basal plate and the dorsal part is called as a alar plate. So, there is a sulcus limitans is the one which is dividing into basal and alar. The alar is the sensory and the basal becomes the motor. Okay. And there is, you can see the roof plate and the floor plate and the layer of cells remains same in the neural tube. Okay. So, in the spinal cord when we take, so we can see here, so how the tubular structures is finally comes and forms this spinal cord. Okay. So, there again there is a mantle layer, okay, and marginal layer and there is a alar plate what we can see and the basal plate, that is a ventral horn is the basal plate and the dorsal horn is the alar plate is the sensory. Okay. And between these two there is an intermediate horn, okay, between these two and the tracts. Okay. So, this is how the development of the neural tube in the spinal cord. Okay. Now, coming to the myelencephalon. Okay. So, the myelencephalon is the one which develops into the medulla oblongata. Okay. So, medulla oblongata has a closed part, okay, which contains the central canal. Okay. So, it is like a spinal cord, whereas the open part which forms the caudal area of the floor of the fourth ventricle. Okay. So, here then what happens in the medulla, how this the functional columns are formed in the open part. Okay. So, where we can see there is a roof plate. Okay. This is greatly widened to form the roof of the fourth ventricle. Okay. When you are where you can see the alar plate which was dorsal coming to lie dorsolateral to the basal lamina. Okay. So, and this alar plate or the alar lamina gives to the sensory functional components. Okay. And whereas this basal lamina which slightly comes closer near the floor plate, okay, this gives rise to the motor functional columns. Okay. So, this is how what happens in the medulla. Okay. And some cells from this alar lamina they migrate, okay, and they form the arcuate and olivary nuclei. Okay. That is the caudal part of the bulbopontine extension. But whereas here the white matter is predominantly extraneous and in the closed part the general somatic afferent column, this persists as a nucleus gracilis and nucleus cuneatus, where in the open part it forms the nucleus of the cranial nerves. In the closed part they form the somatic afferent column as the nucleus gracilis and for cuneatus. Okay, and also we can appreciate here the choroid plexus. So, this how the alar and the basal plate they rearrange and forms the functional columns in the myelencephalon. So, you can see here there is a somatic efferent, special visceral efferent, general visceral efferent, then general visceral afferent, then special visceral afferent and somatic afferent columns are formed. Okay. Now, let us see in the metencephalon. Okay. So, the metencephalon forms the pons and the cerebellum. The pons has a similar functional columns to the medulla. Okay. So, again here the marginal layer of the basal plate expands, okay, and the pontine nuclei they arise from the migration from the alar lamina. So, the alar lamina is a sensory one. So, from there the cells migrate to the ventral and they form the pontine nuclei in the pons. Okay. Then the mesencephalon. Okay. The mesencephalon it retains the primitive nature of this brain vesicle. Okay, so there is a central cavity which persists here, okay, and it narrowed down, though it persists, but it is narrows down, okay, and in the basal plate, okay, you have the two functional columns, okay, where with the floor plate which forms the tegmentum, okay. So, where we can see there is a nerve nucleus, what we see there is a visceral efferent column and somatic efferent column for the third and the fourth cranial nerves, okay, and we can see the formation of the crus cerebri and the substantia nigra here, okay. So, the alar lamina forms the two functional columns with the roof plate forms the tectum, okay, and the marginal layer of the basal plate expands to form the crura, and the substantia nigra and red nucleus they formed by the migration of the cells from the alar lamina. So, alar lamina they expands, okay, and migrate to form the substantia nigra and the red nucleus. Okay. Now, this is the finally, you can see in this image how the each level the nucleus or this functional columns are arranged according to their development. So, you can see in the image there is the spinal cord and the lower part of the medulla, you can appreciate the alar plate and the basal plate. Next, in the upper part of the medulla where it is expanded and it is forming the roof plate is forming the roof of the fourth ventricle. So, alar plate and basal plate they migrate little medially to the ventrally, and in the pons we can see again it is almost like upper part of the medulla, it is there the fourth ventricle cavity you can observe here, and in the midbrain again the brain vesicle is retained here with the central canal and the formation of the midbrain. So, this is how the functional columns are developed from the alar plate as well as the basal plate, the sensory and the motor component of the cranial nerve nucleus are formed from this. So, till now we have learnt the 7 functional component, okay, that is the somatic efferent supplies the striated muscles of the body, okay. So, then we have the general visceral efferent, okay. So, then where it supplies the smooth muscles in the glands, okay. Then we have the special visceral efferent, that is the branchial efferent supplies the muscle derived from the branchial apparatus at the pharyngeal arches. Then we have the general somatic afferent, okay. So, we can observe here it supplies from the skin, okay. Then special somatic afferent, that is from the vestibulocochlear part. Then you have the general visceral afferent, okay. So, general visceral afferent, that is from the visceral epithelium, okay. Then we have the special visceral afferent, that is from the taste, okay. So, these are the 7 functional columns, what it is supplies according to that the cranial nerves has the functional columns, okay. So, here you can just see here there is a sulcus limitans on either side, okay, and when observe here towards the sulcus it is a general and the visceral components are towards the sulcus limitans, okay. So, you take in anything the arrangement is like this from you go from in one order from medial to lateral or from lateral to medial. So, they are arranged in this order. So, let us see from here first the somatic efferent, special visceral efferent, then general visceral efferent, then after the sulcus limitans we have from the basal plate there is a general visceral afferent, special visceral afferent, general somatic afferent and special somatic afferent. Okay. So, now let us see the cranial nerves which are sensory and which are motor. Okay. On the right side we can see here they are the motor nucleus of the cranial nerves. Okay. So, in the midbrain you see the Edinger-Westphal nucleus, then the nucleus of the oculomotor nerve and the nucleus of the trochlear nerve. They are all the motor. So, they form the afferent column. Next, in the Pons we have the nucleus of the abducent, motor nucleus of the trigeminal nerve. Okay. Then you have the motor nucleus of the facial nerve, lacrimatory nucleus, then superior and inferior salivary nucleus. Okay. Then you have the nucleus ambiguous, it is from the lower part of the pons, the medulla it extends. Then the dorsal nucleus of the vagus, again it extends from the medulla, okay, complete in the medulla and in the little bit in the extends into the pons. Then you have the hypoglossal in the medulla. These are the motor component. Let us see what are the sensory components. We have the mesencephalic nucleus of trigeminal in the midbrain, then in the chief sensory nucleus of trigeminal in the pons, okay. Then the cochlear and the vestibular nucleus in the pons, as well as little bit extends to the upper part of the medulla. Then the nucleus of the tractus solitarius extends medulla and into the lower part of the pons, and nucleus of the spinal tract of trigeminal nerve, it as you can see completely extending from the medulla till the midbrain it is going. Okay. So, these are the sensory nucleuses what we see, and also you can see there is a connection among these sensory nucleuses. Okay. Now, let us see the each cranial nerve, what are the nucleuses and what it supplies and what are the functional components. Okay. Now, let us go with the oculomotor nerve. Okay. So, the oculomotor nerve has a two component, one is the somatic efferent component. Okay. So, that nucleus is present in the midbrain. So, this supplies the extrinsic muscles of the eyeball. Okay. That component is called as a somatic efferent column. It also has the general visceral efferent. Okay. So, that is the Edinger-Westphal nucleus. So, this supplies the sphincter pupillae and ciliaris muscle through the ciliary ganglion. The short ciliary nerves supplies the sphincter pupillae and ciliaris muscle. So, oculomotor nerve has somatic efferent and general visceral efferent column. Okay. Next is the trochlear, it has only one functional component, that is the somatic efferent. Okay, so that we can see it is in the midbrain. So, this supplies the superior oblique muscle. Okay, so it has only one component, that is the somatic efferent column. Okay, next comes the trigeminal. Okay, so trigeminal has one component, that is the somatic afferent. Okay, so the somatic afferent that carries the proprioceptive impulses from the muscles of mastication, okay, to the mesencephalic nucleus of trigeminal nerve, which is present in the midbrain. Okay, so that is a somatic afferent column. Okay, and another component is the special visceral efferent. Okay, I said special visceral means it supplies the muscles derived from the first pharyngeal arches, that is the muscles of mastication. So, the nucleus of this is present in the pons, that is the motor nucleus of the trigeminal nerve is present in the pons, that is the special visceral efferent column. Okay, another component is the general somatic afferent. Okay, so that is the nucleus is present, the chief sensory nucleus of trigeminal nerve, which is present in the pons as well as extends to the midbrain. Okay, so that is the general somatic afferent. Okay, it also has the fibers coming from the spinal nucleus of trigeminal nerve. Again, that is the general somatic afferent. Okay. So, that is it carries the exteroceptive sensation from the skin of face, mucous membrane of mouth and nose. Okay. That is through these two cranial nerve and the nucleus it divides, the general somatic afferent. So, trigeminal nerve has three functional components. This is somatic afferent, then special visceral efferent and general somatic afferent. Okay. Now, let us see what is the abducent nerve. So, abducent nerve, like a trochlear, it also has only one functional component, that is somatic efferent. So, it supplies the lateral rectus muscle. The nucleus is present in the pons. The abducent nucleus is present in the pons. So, abducent nerve has somatic efferent column. Okay. Now, let us see what are the columns of the facial nerve. Okay. The facial nerve has the special visceral efferent. I said it is the special visceral. So, it supplies the muscles of facial expression derived from the second pharyngeal arch. Okay. So, the nucleus is present in the pons. So, this nucleus, when it is winding around the abducent nucleus, it forms a elevation, that is the facial colliculus. So, this component is the special visceral efferent column. Okay. Then we have the general visceral efferent column. So, that is from the superior salivatory nucleus, supplies the submandibular and sublingual gland through the submandibular ganglion. Okay. So, that is the general visceral efferent column, that is the submandibular gland and sublingual gland. Another is the general somatic afferent. Okay. So, that is the which the component is present in the spinal nucleus of the trigeminal nerve, but it is through the facial nerve. So, that is from the skin of the external ear. So, that is why it is called as a general somatic afferent, relays in the spinal nucleus of trigeminal nerve, but it carries from the facial nerve. So, another component is the special visceral afferent. Okay. That is the nucleus of tractus solitarius, which is, you can see here, it is present in the medulla and also in the pons. Okay. So, this carries the sensation from the taste buds of anterior 2/3 of the tongue. Okay, relays in the nucleus of tractus solitarius. So, facial nerve has special visceral efferent, general visceral efferent, general somatic afferent and special visceral afferent. Okay, now let us see the vestibulocochlear nerve. Okay. So, as I said, it is the special somatic afferent. Okay. So, this has only the vestibulocochlear nerve has this component, that is the special somatic afferent. Okay. So, that is the you can see the nucleus which is present in the vestibular nucleus is present in the pons, and the cochlear nucleus also just extends into the upper part of the medulla also. The cochlear part is from the organ of Corti, that is in the auditory system, auditory pathway. Then the vestibular, it is from the semicircular duct, atrial and the saccule, that is for the equilibrium and the balance. So, vestibulocochlear nerve has special somatic afferent column. Now, the ninth cranial nerve, that is the glossopharyngeal nerve. Okay. It has got the general visceral efferent. Okay. So, it is a general visceral efferent. Okay. That is from the inferior salivatory nucleus, from the pons. Okay. The nucleus is present in the pons. Okay. So, this supplies the parotid gland through the otic ganglion. Okay. It supplies the parotid gland through the otic ganglion. Another is the special visceral efferent column. Okay, as I said, again this supplies the stylopharyngeus muscle, again it is from the pharyngeal arch muscle. Okay, so that is from the nucleus ambiguous, you can see it is from the medulla and extends to the lower part as well as the upper part of the medulla. Okay, so that is a special visceral efferent column. Okay, and it also has a general visceral afferent. Okay, that is the general sense from the pharynx and posterior most part of the tongue that relays into the nucleus of tractus solitarius. Okay, so that is from the medulla as well as it extends into the pons. You can see the longitudinal column of nucleus of tractus solitarius. Okay, and it also has another component, the special visceral afferent column. So, it is the taste bud, taste sensation from the posterior 1/3 of the tongue that also relays into the nucleus of tractus solitarius. So, glossopharyngeal nerve has general visceral efferent, special visceral efferent, general visceral afferent and special visceral afferent column. Okay. Now, the vagus nerve and cranial part of accessory nerve. Okay. So, this has again the 4 functional columns. Okay. So, that is the special visceral efferent. Okay. So, that is since this is present in the nucleus ambiguous, it is present in the medulla. You can see the longitudinal column. So, this supplies the muscles of the pharynx and larynx. So, these two nerve, the vagus and the cranial part of accessory, they form a plexus and supplies these. So, they call it special visceral efferent. Okay. Then another component is the general visceral efferent. Okay. So, that is present in the dorsal nucleus of vagus that supplies the thoracic and abdominal viscera. Okay. So, that is the general visceral efferent. Okay. That is from the dorsal nucleus of the vagus in the medulla it is present. Okay. Then another is the afferent columns are the general visceral afferent, that is sensation from the thoracic and abdominal viscera, pharynx and larynx. Okay. That relates into the nucleus of tractus solitarius. You can see the nucleus. Then another component is the special visceral afferent. Okay. The taste from the posterior most part of the tongue. Okay. So, that is the special visceral afferent. So, special visceral afferent, it is again relates in the nucleus of tractus solitarius. So, vagus and cranial part of accessory has special visceral efferent, general visceral efferent, general visceral afferent and special visceral afferent. Okay. Now, the spinal part of the accessory, it has the only one component, that is a special visceral efferent. So, you can see it is the root from the spinal cord, the upper 5 cervical and as well as the lower part of the medulla. So, that is the spinal accessory. Okay. So, this as a special visceral efferent supplies the trapezius and sternocleidomastoid muscle. This only spinal part of the accessory. Cranial part is along with the vagus, it has a different functional columns. Okay. Then the hypoglossal, again it is only one component, it has the somatic efferent. It supplies all the muscles of the tongue except styloglossus. Okay. So, that is the hypoglossal nucleus which is present in the medulla, the somatic efferent, the muscles of the tongue except styloglossus. Okay. So, these are the 12 cranial nerves with the functional components. Okay. Now, we have seen that so many nucleuses are sharing with many other cranial nerves. Okay. So, what are the nucleuses which has more than one nerve related with this functional column? One is the superior and inferior salivatory nucleus, that is the general visceral efferent column. So, this is present in the facial and glossopharyngeal nerve. Okay. That is the superior and inferior salivatory nucleus. Okay. Then the nucleus ambiguous, it is the special visceral efferent. This is shared by the glossopharyngeal, vagus and accessory nerve. Okay. Then another nucleus is you can see the nucleus of tractus solitarius. It is a special visceral afferent. Okay. So, it is shared by the facial, glossopharyngeal and vagus. Okay. So, that is from the nucleus of tractus solitarius. Then is the spinal nucleus of trigeminal nerve. It is a general somatic afferent. Okay. This has the trigeminal nerve, facial nerve, glossopharyngeal and vagus nerve. Okay. So, this spinal nucleus has the 4 cranial nerves, that the trigeminal, facial, glossopharyngeal and vagus. Okay. So, these are just to summarize, these are the cranial nerves. The oculomotor present in the midbrain and trochlear again in the midbrain, trigeminal is in the pons, okay, abducent, facial, again it is in the pons, okay. Then the vestibulocochlear, it is again in the pons and little bit in the medulla. Then you have the glossopharyngeal, again the glossopharyngeal is in the medulla, vagus, spinal accessory and the hypoglossal, they are all present in the medulla. Spinal accessory again from the spinal cord. Nucleus of tractus solitarius present in the medulla, extends into the pons, okay, and also the principal sensory nucleus of trigeminal nerve present in the pons and as well as in the little bit extend to the midbrain, and Edinger vestibule nucleus, you can see it is in the midbrain. So, these are the cranial nerve nucleus associated and where it comes from. So, now we have studied the cranial nerve, what are the functional component it has. Now, just quickly we will go through. So, each functional component, what it supplies and what are the cranial nerves and where they are present. Okay. So, first is the general somatic efferent, okay. So, that has the 3rd and 4th cranial nerve, it is in the midbrain, 6th nerve in the pons and 12th, that is the hypoglossal in the medulla. Okay, so this general somatic efferent, okay, so it is the supplies the striated muscle developing from the body wall, okay, that is why it is called as a somatic, okay. That is the preotic somites, that is the extraocular muscles, that is the 3rd, 4th and 6th nerve, okay, and occipital myotomes, that is the 12th cranial nerves, that is in the medulla. Okay, next column is the special visceral efferent. As I said, it is the pharyngeal arches, okay, the fibers from this special visceral efferent that supplies the muscles developing from the branchial arches, okay, the muscles of the first arch, that is the motor nucleus of trigeminal nerve, it is in the pons, okay. Then the muscles of the second arch, that is the motor nucleus of facial, it is in the lower part of the pons. Then the third arch, the muscle is the nerve is the glossopharyngeal, that you can see it is in the medulla. Fourth and the sixth arches, you have the vagus and the accessory, again that is present in the medulla. Then the general visceral efferent, okay, so the fibers are parasympathetic fibers from a general visceral nuclei, supplies the smooth muscles of the viscera, blood vessels and the glands, okay. So, they are from the cranial parasympathetic outflow, okay. So, that is the Edinger-Westphal nucleus of the third nerve, it is in the midbrain, okay. Then the superior salivatory nucleus, okay, and lacrimatory nucleus of the 7th nerve, that is the facial nerve, again it is present in the pons, okay. Then the dorsal motor nucleus of the vagus, okay. So, that is the vagus nerve, it is again present in the medulla. So, this is the general visceral efferent, okay. Now, the general visceral afferent, okay. So, this is the caudal portion receives a general visceral sensation, okay. So, that is the interoceptive sensation from the pharynx, okay, that is the 9th and the 10th nerve, okay. And the viscera which receives are like heart, lungs and the upper part of a GIT, that is from the 10th nerve again. So, you can see here the 9th and the 10th nerve. Then the nerve fibers from the carotid body, carotid sinus to the general visceral afferent column through the 9th and the 10th nerve, okay. So, that is the nucleus of tractus solitarius which is present in the medulla of the 7th, 9th and the 10th nerve, okay. This is the general visceral afferent, okay. Then the special visceral afferent, okay, that is the special sensation of the taste from the tongue to the nucleus of the special visceral column, okay. So, as epithelium of the tongue is endodermal in origin, so it is present in the nucleus tractus solitarius, it is in the rostral portion of the nucleus, that is the gustatory nucleus which receives the taste fibers through the 7th, 9th and the 10th, anterior 2/3 from the 7th, posterior 1/3 is from the 9th and the posterior most part is from the 10th, that is the vagus. That is the special visceral afferent column, okay. Now, the general somatic afferent, that is the pain, temperature and touch from the skin and the mucous membrane and proprioceptive sensation, that is the general somatic afferent column through the 5th cranial nerve, mainly the chief sensory, spinal and mesencephalic nucleus, okay. So, the general somatic sensations from the external ear, mucosa of the posterior 1/3 of the tongue, pharynx, larynx, it is through the 7th, 9th and 10th, okay. They rely in the trigeminal sensory nucleus which is present in the pons main. Then special somatic afferent, okay, that is the special senses of hearing and equilibrium to the special somatic afferent column nuclei, that is the vestibulocochlear. So, there you can almost present in the pons, the vestibular component present both in the pons and the medulla, cochlear it is mainly at the lower part of the pons. Whereas, the fibers of the olfactory and optic nerves also classified as special somatic afferent, as the olfactory and visual epithelium are ectodermal in origin. So, their optic and olfactory also is the special somatic afferent column, okay. To summarize, we have the 7 functional components, that is the somatic efferent supplies the striated muscles, okay. Then the general visceral efferent. So, general visceral efferent, okay, they supplies the smooth muscles and the glands. Then you have the special visceral efferent supplies the muscles derived from the branchial arches. Then you have the general somatic afferent. Okay, it supplies the general somatic, you can see here the fibers where it is the from the skin. Okay, then the special somatic afferent, that is from the otosis, that is the vestibulocochlear. Then general visceral afferent, that is the from the general visceral afferent is from the viscera, that is the epithelium, and special visceral, it is from the taste bud. Special visceral afferent is from the taste bud. So, we have a 7 functional columns. Okay, and the cranial nerves, what we see, the oculomotor and trochlear in the midbrain, trigeminal, abducent, facial, okay, superior salivary nucleus, and the vestibulocochlear we see in the pons. Okay, and the glossopharyngeal, the vagus, then the hypoglossal, spinal part of the accessory, all we see is in the medulla. So, vestibulocochlear, it also extends little bit into the upper part of the medulla, and principal sensory nucleus we see in the pons as well as in the medulla, and the sensory Edinger vestibule nucleus we see in the midbrain. Okay, so now let us see, just summarize what are the cranial nerves with the nucleus. The olfactory has a special somatic afferent, optic also has special somatic afferent, oculomotor has somatic efferent and general visceral efferent, trochlear has somatic efferent, trigeminal has special visceral efferent and general somatic afferent, abducent has the somatic efferent, facial has special visceral efferent, general visceral efferent, okay, then special visceral afferent, general somatic afferent. Okay, vestibulocochlear has special somatic afferent, glossopharyngeal has special visceral efferent, general visceral efferent, general visceral afferent and special visceral afferent columns. And vagus and cranial part of the accessory has special visceral efferent, general visceral efferent, general visceral afferent, special visceral afferent and general somatic afferent. Spinal part of the accessory has special visceral efferent column and hypoglossal has special somatic efferent column. Okay. So, these are the cranial nerves with the functional components. Thank you.